Today, we're talking about how you can go from being a top 10 draft pick, signing for tens of millions of dollars, to slowly losing it all. And not just with one bad investment or with a Ponzi scheme. No, quietly, over time. And the worst part of all, you might be the last person to know that it's gone. So if you're an athlete out there that wants to get done with your career and not end up on 30 for 30 broke or wonder what the heck just happened, I made this video for you. Now, to solve any problem, we have to start with what the root cause is. Consider as athletes, the root cause is a couple different things. I want to share a stat with you. Of the top 10 NFL draft picks in last year's draft, the average Instagram following was 195,000 people. That is the equivalent of 3 NFL stadiums packed to the gills. So why do I share that? Well, consider that if you had 195,000 people following your every move, cheering you on, making you feel important, that might just give you a little bit of overconfidence that the thing that you actually are really good at, the sport you're playing, could feed into something else in your life, like managing your money. And I'm here to tell you, it doesn't work that way. You then combine that with the fact that getting to your second contract, the contract that pays you after that first signing bonus that we talked about, is actually way harder than you think. Consider that in the 2016 MLB draft, the top 10 draft picks that got drafted, this was about 10 years ago, only 4 of those guys are still playing today. In fact, 5 of those guys are completely out of the game, and one of them is hurt and might never play again. None of those players have ever made an all-star team. And these were the top 10 players in the entire country. Now, I don't say that to be a Debbie Downer. I say that to tell you that it is so hard to make money from professional sports, and you have to be treating every single dollar like it's your last. Compound that with the fact that when we think about an athlete's earning curve, all of a sudden our earning curve goes like this. We get drafted from 18 to 21, and we're making tens of millions of dollars. But then by the time we're 25, our career could be over. In fact, if you're like me, my career was hanging on by a thread when I was 25. Now, if we compare that to the average working individual, and they're in college from the time that they're 18 to 22, they start making a little bit of money along the way. By the time they get to 45, 55, maybe 60 years old, they're making more money every single year. They're starting to learn the financial habits that need to empower them when they start making more money. But as an athlete, we have it flipped on our head. If we make a financial mistake early on in our 20s, it could be like breaking our leg. It could be the thing that affects us for decades in the future. So with that framing in mind, consider this. That only gets worse when it comes to how we think about spending. When it comes to spending, all of a sudden, we are in a situation where we could buy literally almost anything. You want to buy a $5 million house? Well, all I got to do is put 20% down. That's $1 million. I got that. You want to buy a Ferrari? Oh, $250,000? I got the money to do that. You want to buy that $100,000 watch? Easy. I got plenty of money to be able to do that. But let me ask you this question. Can you actually afford those things? Now, you might be thinking, what's the difference between the two? Well, buying something just means that you did it one time. Yeah, you wrote the check. You did the $1 million down payment. You bought the $100,000 watch. You bought the $250,000 car. Affording it is far different. That means that year after year after year, you could actually maintain that same lifestyle. Could you keep buying those watches? Could you keep maintaining that car? Could you keep maintaining that $1 million house and all the mortgage payments, all the property taxes, all the maintenance that comes along with it? See, that's the question you have to ask yourself. Because one of the biggest traps we fall into as athletes when it comes to spending is we're not thinking about spending in terms of what we could actually afford. We're thinking about spending in terms of what we could buy. What we could buy is based on a contract number. What we can afford is based on how much money we have saved. And look, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a top 10 draft pick, or whether you're somebody out there that just wants to understand what is going on with my money, I have something for you. A free tool, our Moment Money Quiz, that in less than 2 minutes, you'll find out in 6 key areas exactly what you're doing and some ways that you might be able to improve. Let me show you something. If you have $1 million saved when you get done playing, you could realistically spend between 3 to 5% of that every single year without touching that initial principal and interest. Now, you have $5 million, it's between $150,000 and $250,000. You have $10 million, it's between $300,000 and $500,000. All those numbers I just threw out are still really big numbers, but I'm going to tell you the shock that athletes have when I tell them that just because you sign for 5, 10, 15, $20 million doesn't mean we could spend $1 million a year. If we want this money to last, we have to follow that rule. How much money do I have saved? And then based on that, if I wasn't making another big paycheck, because remember, we already told you how hard it is to make that next paycheck, to get that second contract, could I actually afford it based on the number I have saved? So it works like this. You have $5 million saved. You want to spend $150,000 to $250,000 a year. Could you actually afford to buy the $5 million house? No. You could, actually buy it because you could put the $1 million down for the down payment, but you certainly couldn't afford it. And that's where the spending all of a sudden starts compounding in reverse. And that's before we even think about the taxes. So let's talk about taxes for a second. I just mentioned all these things that we could be spending money on, but I'm here to tell you that your biggest lifetime expense is going to be your tax bill. Doesn't matter if you're an athlete, doesn't matter if you're a hardworking individual, we're all going to pay taxes. And the trap I see athletes fall into is one of two camps. In camp one, they're not educated around taxes. In fact, they don't even know the taxes are going to come out, or they don't even know that they're going to be due. And then when the tax bill comes, they're shocked. They don't have the money set aside. And we're in a situation where we're scrambling. And that pit in your stomach that we talked about earlier in this video becomes very real. On the other side, I see athletes that are so focused on whatever the latest coolest strategy is. Some sort of second, third level tax planning move that's going to save them money in taxes this year. And what happens is they certainly do not pay as much in taxes, but they also don't have any liquidity to support their lifestyle. In fact, most of the time they've given away a lot of the money because in the name of taxes, they needed to do that. Or maybe some of the investments they made are actually so risky. It's like creating a second job for you when your first job is your home run. The thing you're doing on the field is actually the thing that's going to build wealth in the future, not the investment that you're making just to reduce your tax bill. So here's the solve for that. If you think about it as an athlete, you need to make sure that you're taking advantage of every level one move. These are things like tax advantage retirement accounts. These are things like gifting strategies that actually make sense for you and your portfolio. These are things like investment strategies that are not just tax efficient on the upfront, but tax efficient for the next 10 to 15 years. There are ways to make sure that you are not tipping the IRS, but also not creating a second job for yourself. All of that comes before we ever actually invest any money. So let's talk about investing. Consider the fact that you got to where you're at, high draft pick, professional athlete, based on doing the little things over and over and over again. In fact, compare it to when you actually go to the gym and you work out. Chances are, I bet your gym workout, what you're doing to actually stay healthy on the field, isn't something that's really Instagram worthy. In fact, you're probably doing a lot of the same mundane sets you've been doing 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I know for me, when I was going through this, the amount of times I did a shoulder program with 5-pound dumbbells, certainly nothing to brag about on Instagram, but it helped me stay healthy on the field more times than I could count. What if we treated investing that same way? What we try to do is we try to think about investing in terms of what is the coolest, shiniest, newest thing that comes up. But if we did that when we were in the weight room, chances are we wouldn't even be on the field anymore. We wouldn't even be able to perform. So why do we do it when it comes to investing? Consider these numbers. I mentioned earlier about the 2016 MLB draft and how top 10 draft picks aren't even playing anymore. But what if I told you that if they just took $1 million from their multi-million-dollar signing bonus and they didn't invest in anything cool or fancy, they just invested in the S&P 500, the 500 biggest companies in the United States, how much money would they have? Well, they'd have a little more than $4 million today. One investment decision that didn't require them to have a second job, that wasn't the fanciest or shiniest thing, that wasn't going to create the next Instagram reel for them, but it started to create generational wealth for their family. And that's the truth. When it comes to investing, oftentimes I see so many athletes that go out there and they develop complexity and they develop the shiny new thing. And what they end up doing is they end up creating a second job for themselves. They end up taking on way more risk than they need to. And look, if you don't believe me, consider that Warren Buffett, the legendary investor, his number one rule, don't lose money. You know what his number 2 rule was? Never forget rule number 1. So if you're an athlete out there and you're thinking about investing your first dollar, you need to understand what is the downside and how much risk should I be taking? And oh, by the way, should I just be doing the boring, mundane thing just like I'm doing on over here in the weight room to actually stay healthy on the field in my investment portfolio? I'd make the argument you probably should be. Now look, how do you tie all this together when you know that your priority should be on the field? I would make the argument that you need to make sure that you have a team around you that not just has the technical expertise, but has the expertise in exactly what you're walking through. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you were going to have surgery and it was a career-defining surgery. Maybe you're a pitcher and it was on your right arm. Maybe you're a running back and it was on your leg. You wouldn't just find the best doctor. You would find the most capable doctor that has had the absolute most experience working with the exact thing that you're doing for the exact skill that you have, being a professional athlete. You wouldn't just go out and hire a doctor because he has skill, but he has never actually worked on an athlete. And I want you to think about your money the same way. Oftentimes, I see athletes make decisions around who they have on their financial team for reasons that don't frankly matter. You want to make sure that it's a combination of the technical ability to actually be able to help you, but also the ability that they understand what you're walking through. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help you with that. Videos like this are exactly what I'm trying to do, is educate you to make sure that you make the most of your money. And if you want to take it a step further, check out our team at momentprivatewealth.com. We work specifically with professional athletes to make sure that every single dollar that they earn, even if they don't get to that second contract, is maximized when they're done playing. As always, my goal is to help you get smarter with your money. Until next time, my friends.